Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Today we're diving deep, literally, into a hidden world that shaped the entire course of human history. Beneath the restless waves of our oceans lies a secret map of sunken landscapes, the vanished highways of humanity. These are the lost land bridges, vast territories that emerged during the ice ages, only to be reclaimed by the rising tides as the world warmed. These weren't just barren corridors for crossing. They were vibrant, living worlds, sprawling tundras, lush forests, and fertile plains that supported unique ecosystems and cradled human populations for millennia. The engine that created and destroyed these ephemeral continents was the planet's own climate cycle. During ice ages, immense quantities of water became locked away in continent-spanning ice sheets. This caused global sea levels to drop dramatically, in some cases by more than 120 meters or 400 feet. This exposed the shallow continental shelves, revealing complex landscapes with rivers, lakes, and hills. For tens of thousands of years, they offered new frontiers for plants, animals, and the nomadic human groups who hunted them. Then, as the climate warmed, the process reversed. The relentless rise of the sea gradually inundated these lands, swallowing homes, hunting grounds, and sacred sites, forever altering the course of human history. Today, scientists are using high-resolution sonar, remotely operated vehicles, and sediment coring to piece together the story of these lost lands, bringing the vanished highways of humanity back to life. Let's begin with perhaps the most famous of them all, Beringia, the great land bridge that connected Asia to the Americas. At its greatest extent, around 21,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum, Beringia was an immense subcontinent stretching over 1.6 million square kilometers. That's an area as large as British Columbia and Alberta combined. This was no narrow isthmus, but a huge, habitable landscape that remained largely free of ice, serving as a crucial ecological refuge and a vital corridor for life. For a long time, we imagined Beringia as a uniform mammoth steppe, but modern research, analyzing fossil pollen and ancient animal remains, paints a more complex picture. Beringia was a mosaic of environments, dominated by a cold, dry, but surprisingly productive steppe tundra. It was a world of grasses, herbs, and low-lying shrubs like birch and willow, with pockets of trees in sheltered areas. This vegetation sustained a remarkable array of large Ice Age mammals, a true Serengeti of the north. Herds of woolly mammoths, steppe bison, and wild horses roamed the plains. They were preyed upon by formidable predators like the scimitar cat and the terrifying giant short-faced bear. The landscape also supported caribou, musk oxen, and even species like the Arctic camel. The rich animal life was the critical resource that drew human hunters out onto this immense, now vanished plain. For decades, the story of how people reached the Americas was dominated by the Clovis first model. This theory held that the first humans crossed Beringia around 13,500 years ago and spread rapidly south through an ice-free corridor that opened up in Canada. However, a wave of new discoveries has completely rewritten this narrative. One of the most significant sites is the Upward Sun River site in Alaska. Here, archaeologists uncovered the 500-year-old remains of 2 infants and a young child. The infant burials are particularly revealing. They were interred in a pit with grave goods, including finely crafted stone points and decorated antler rods, likely parts of a sophisticated weapons system. The remains were covered in red ochre, a pigment used in burials across the ancient world, signifying a complex ritual and spiritual life. Even more strikingly, an obsidian flake found with the burials was traced to a source 600 kilometers away, a testament to the extensive mobility or long-distance trade networks of these early peoples. Other sites push the timeline back even further. The Bluefish Caves in Yukon, Canada, contain cut-marked animal bones dated to as old as 24,000 years ago. This suggests a human presence in eastern Beringia during the height of the last ice age. This finding supports the Beringian standstill hypothesis, which posits that a population of humans lived in the isolation of the Beringian refuge for thousands of years before finally moving south into the Americas. Genetics has truly revolutionized this story. Analysis of both ancient and modern DNA has confirmed that indigenous peoples of the Americas are descended from these Siberian migrants. Groundbreaking research on the Upward Sun River infants revealed they belonged to a previously unknown population, now named Ancient Beringians. This group was related to, but distinct from, the ancestors of all other Native Americans. This suggests a single founding migration into the Americas, likely happening before 20,000 years ago. The story isn't a simple one-way street either. Genetic studies also show evidence of a back migration, where some groups returned from North America to Siberia. What is certain is that the now submerged land of Beringia was the gateway, a homeland and a highway that funneled the ancestors of tens of millions of people into a new world. Now, let's travel across the globe to the gray and turbulent waters of the North Sea. Here, between Great Britain and continental Europe, lies another lost world, Doggerland. Named after the Dogger Bank, a large sandbank that was once one of its highest points, this submerged landscape was the heartland of Mesolithic northwestern Europe. For much of the 20th century, it was dismissed as a simple land bridge. Today, we know it was a vast and vibrant country, a rich landscape whose final, catastrophic destruction has been called Britain's own Atlantis. After the last glaciers began their retreat around 18,000 years ago, the exposed North Sea floor transformed from tundra into an increasingly attractive environment. Pollen analysis from sediment cores reveals a changing world. First came pine and birch forests, later replaced by oak, hazel, and elm as the climate warmed. Seismic data, originally collected for oil and gas exploration, has allowed archaeologists to map this vanished world in astonishing detail. It reveals a complex landscape of gentle hills, wooded valleys, large freshwater lakes, and meandering river systems. This was a paradise for hunter-gatherers. The extensive wetlands, marshes, and coastlines would have been teeming with life, perfect for fishing and fowling. The forest supported abundant game, including red deer, wild cattle, and wild boar. The sheer productivity of this environment meant that Doggerland was likely one of the most densely populated regions of Mesolithic Europe, a place where nomadic groups may have even established more permanent settlements. Evidence of the people who called Doggerland home has been literally dredged up from the seafloor for over a century. The first concrete proof came in 1931. The crew of the fishing trawler Kalinda, working near the Lehman and Ower banks, hauled up a lump of peat containing a stunning artifact, a barbed point masterfully carved from antler. This harpoon tip, dated to the Mesolithic period, proved that humans had inhabited this now underwater realm. Since then, numerous other artifacts have been recovered, including flint tools, human remains, and the bones of both Ice Age beasts and the Mesolithic animals that succeeded them. Each find is a pinprick of light into a lost way of life. The end of Doggerland was a tragedy in two acts. The first was a slow, relentless rise in sea levels. Over centuries, the inhabitants would have witnessed their world shrinking. Coastlines retreated, rivers widened, and highlands became islands. This gradual process would have forced populations to move, creating pressure and potentially sparking conflict over shrinking territories. It was a climate crisis played out over generations. The final act, however, was sudden and catastrophic. Around 200 years ago, a massive underwater landslide occurred off the coast of Norway, an event known as the Storegga Slide. This colossal displacement of sediment triggered a mega tsunami that ripped across the North Sea. The waves, estimated to have been 3 to 6 meters high by the time they reached the British coast, would have been devastating for the low-lying plains of Doggerland. Entire communities living along the coast would have been annihilated with little warning. This event didn't cause the final submergence, but it was a cataclysm that likely wiped out a significant portion of the remaining population and accelerated the abandonment of the last vestiges of this Mesolithic heartland. Within a few centuries, the last islands of Doggerland slipped beneath the waves, and a human world vanished from sight. While Beringia and Doggerland were defined by ice and tundra, equally significant lost worlds were created in the tropics. During low sea levels, the geography of Southeast Asia and Australia was radically transformed. The great islands of Sumatra, Java, and Borneo were connected to the Asian mainland, forming a vast exposed shelf called Sundaland. To the southeast, Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were joined into a single giant continent known as Sahul. Sundaland was an evolutionary hotspot of immense biodiversity. When exposed, it was a dynamic landscape. Long thought to be covered in dense tropical rainforest, recent studies suggest a more varied environment, possibly including a savanna corridor of open grassland running through its center. This corridor would have been a crucial highway for animals and the early humans who hunted them. The flooding of Sundaland at the end of the last ice age was dramatic. A sea level rise of 130 meters submerged half of the landmass, breaking it into the archipelagos we see today. This had a profound impact on human populations. As the land was inundated, human groups became fragmented and isolated on newly formed islands. This isolation fostered genetic divergence. The warmer, wetter climate also led to population growth in the remaining areas, causing population density to surge. This pressure, in turn, drove migrations, forcing people to move in search of new lands, likely spurring a migration back towards mainland Southeast Asia. This has led to the out-of-Sundaland theory, which suggests this drowned subcontinent could have been the original cradle of the Austronesian-speaking peoples who later colonized the Pacific. Now let's turn to Sahul. The settlement of Sahul represents one of humanity's greatest achievements, our species' first major maritime colonization. To reach Sahul from Sunda, people had to make a series of open water crossings, a feat accomplished at least 65,000 years ago. Once there, they found a continent teeming with unique megafauna, including giant marsupials like the rhino-sized diprotodon and the formidable marsupial lion. Archaeological sites like Majid Bay in Arnhem Land have yielded stone tools and evidence of ochre use dating back 65,000 years. Other ancient sites have revealed shell beads and some of the world's earliest ground-edge axes, dating back over 40,000 years. These finds show that the first Australians were technologically and symbolically sophisticated from the moment they arrived. Much of their earliest history, however, likely lies underwater. The now submerged northwest shelf of Sahul, which connected the Kimberley and Arnhem Land, could have supported a population of up to 500,000 people. The inundation of this shelf between 14,500 and 9,000 years ago would have displaced huge numbers of people, likely triggering major cultural shifts and population movements inland. Another crucial part of Sahul was the Bassian Plain, the land bridge that connected mainland Australia to Tasmania. When it flooded around 14,000 years ago, it created one of the longest periods of human isolation known as the Palawa people of Tasmania lived without outside contact for millennia. Perhaps the most compelling evidence for these lost lands comes not from sonar scans, but from the memories of humanity itself. In many parts of the world, indigenous oral traditions are now being recognized as remarkably accurate records of deep historical events. Nowhere is this clearer than in Australia. Researchers have documented at least 21 distinct groups of stories from Aboriginal communities all around the continent's coastline that describe the drowning of their former lands. The Yidinji people of the Cairns area tell of a time when Fitzroy Island was part of the mainland. The Naranga people of Spencer Gulf speak of when the Gulf was a marshy plain before the sea catastrophically broke through and flooded it. What is astonishing is the age of these memories. By correlating the details in the stories with scientifically established timelines of sea level rise, researchers have concluded that these oral traditions have been faithfully passed down for at least 7,000 years, and in some cases, possibly as long as 13,000 years. They are accounts of eyewitnesses to a world-altering climate transition. Similar echoes are found in North America. Along the Pacific Northwest coast, the oral traditions of peoples like the Klallam and Quinault contain numerous references to great floods and shaking earth. Stories of a battle between the powerful thunderbird and a great whale are now interpreted by some as metaphorical accounts of a subduction zone earthquake and the ensuing tsunami. Even the story of the Persian Gulf oasis, a fertile landmass inundated around 8,000 years ago, may have a mythological parallel. Archaeologist Jeffrey Rose notes that the sudden appearance of highly developed villages along the Gulf's shores corresponds with the final flooding of the basin. He also points out that many Mesopotamian civilizations, including the Sumerians, told flood myths and stories of ancestral origins from a now-drowned paradise. These stories transform our understanding of the past. They are invaluable datasets, human records of geological change, reminding us that these were lived experiences that profoundly shaped the cultures that survived them. The search for humanity's drowned highways continues. The Japanese islands were periodically connected to Asia, allowing for the migration of mammoths and the humans who followed. New discoveries in the Mediterranean suggest a now submerged land bridge may have offered an alternative route for early humans entering Europe. These lost worlds are the missing pieces of the great puzzle of human history. They were the stages upon which some of the most critical dramas of our species' journey played out. The first steps into new continents, the adaptation to radically changing climates, and the development of the resilience that defines us. They remind us that the map of our world is not static. As we today face our own crisis of rising seas and a changing climate, the story of these lost land bridges serves as a powerful and humbling reminder from our deep past. The waters have risen before, worlds have been lost, and humanity has been forced to adapt, move, and remember. The drowned landscapes beneath the waves hold not just the secrets of our ancient origins, but perhaps also lessons for our future. Thanks for listening to G Fun Facts Online.